Good afternoon. While you were waiting for us, we were charging our batteries. So hopefully we're now energetic to start the conversation. I would like to welcome Erez and Michael, and Kishao is joining us online. So I know we had some technical issues to get you online, so welcome to the panel. First of all, I would like to address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is supply and demand. Supply is not meeting the demand, and as a result, it's creating a major issue, and I think it's a matter that we think of it as a global crisis. So let me start with Michael, and if you can elaborate on how serious is this supply-demand crisis, and why is it happening, and do we need to be scared about it? Do we need to be afraid?
We don't need to be scared or afraid, but I think there are two parts to that question. So let me start with the first part, which is demand-supply equation. For our company, EV Metals Group, which is a battery materials and technology company, the end game, the end markets for us are cathode active materials feeding directly to our customers and electric vehicle manufacturers. If we look at, say, the United Kingdom, by 2030 they require 150,000 tons of cathode active materials to support the development of their electric vehicle industry. Look more broadly at Europe, they're forecasting demand for 1.4 million tons of cathode active materials, both high nickel, high energy density CAM, and similarly the lower energy density lithium ferrous phosphate, or otherwise LFP. We forecast, or at least our independent studies are forecasting, a structural deficit out at 2030 of approximately 600,000 tons of cathode active materials, predominantly high nickel, about 25 to 30% of market share with LFP. And there is absolutely no capacity in the United Kingdom at this point in time, and more broadly in Europe, to supply that level of cathode active materials to the battery cell manufacturing plants that are being built or planned to be built to supply the electric vehicle manufacturers. To answer the second part of your question, we've been looking at capital markets for the best part of 2 years. We occupy an interesting position and quite a challenging position for global capital markets when we present as a battery materials and technology company. They haven't seen one before, or not many at all, not outside of China. So what we see is governments regulating for the energy transition, setting emissions targets through, and rightly so, government intervention on a global scale, unprecedented in our history. But when you look at the way in which global private capital is aligning itself, there's no alignment, it's disconnected. And hence you're seeing overinvestment, for example, in battery cell manufacturing capacity, a massive overinvestment. And you look further upstream to the cathode active materials, which we would call the downstream end of the battery materials supply chain, underinvestment. And similarly, midstream, which is where we look at producing high purity chemicals that take the form of lithium hydroxide monohydrate, your nickel, cobalt, manganese, sulfate that feed your CAM plants. Again, massive underinvestment to the point where the US and Europe are dependent on somewhere between 70 and 90% on offshore midstream and downstream processing capacity. The bottom line is government, industry, and global private capital need to collaborate to understand how to most efficiently employ global private capital to support, and we view, integrated supply chains, geopolitically aligned and transparent.
Yeah, I'd like to get into the underinvestment a bit deeper, but let's move to Erez, and with the same issues. Do you share Michael's opinion about it?
I absolutely.
If you don't agree, you can.
I can say that now. I happen to agree with Michael. Of course, we're definitely underinvested over decades. the majors instead of, I mean, the retained earnings go to dividends and they're not retained, and the proportion of earnings going into capex has been declining. There's not a lot of alternative investment vehicles out there if you actually see what the level of challenge that they need to meet with. So there's a few, but not a lot. Capital markets obviously have their issues and volatilities, and we found ourselves in a situation where the demand side is expanding, in a three-dimensional, very rapid pace. Adoption rates, everyone is I think convinced now that this is the way to go, but the supply side is lagging very, very much behind. It's a combination of quite a few factors. And as Michael was saying, it requires, I guess, like that movie, everything everywhere all at once, and it needs to start happening yesterday. So as Traxys, what we do is we're enablers. We build supply chains, we connect the dots, and we try to unclog these bottlenecks. And at the moment, there's a big bottleneck in conversion capacity, which is what enables the upstream to flourish and feeds and, again, enables the downstream. And that's where governments can support substantially. And the upstream itself, if you just take let's say a typical 32 gigawatt cell manufacturer, it requires approximately 20,000 tons of nickel contained in sulfate per annum, and pretty much the same in lithium, let's say in the form of hydroxide. The plant itself, which is about $150 million of capital intensity per gigawatt, is 4 or 5 billion euros or dollars. People are happy to announce it, happy to fund it. But you also need 20,000 tons of lithium hydroxide at $25,000 per LCE capital intensity. That's another 500,000. And we need a lot of those. And they're happening few and slow. And the gap is building there. The gap is building.
Yeah, I mean, we heard this morning the CEO of ERG telling us that in spite of $200 to $300 billion that are being sought after to invest to kind of close the gap and reduce it, there is still that issue. So, Dr. Pichau, let me ask you your opinion. And are you, in your battery operations and manufacturing, are you also sharing with us this supply deficit that's going on?
Yes, I think it's really two problems. One is the supply itself, and another is the geopolitical aspect. Say if globalization...
I'm sorry, Doctor, can you speak a bit louder? The voice is not
Okay.
coming through very clearly.
Sorry. This better?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think really it's two problems. One is the supply itself, and then second is the geopolitical aspect. So if globalization is still alive, I think we have one way of addressing the supply issue, and then which is basically using the current global supply chain. A lot of the mines are in Africa, South America, North America, Australia for lithium, and then those get refined in China. Almost 90% of all lithium gets refined in China and then produced into active materials, cathodes, high nickel, LFP, and then consumed by Korean companies, Chinese companies in Asia to produce cathode and then produce cells and then ship the cells around the world, and also ship the active materials to North America, Europe, and then get built into cells in those areas. So that is the solution in the old days. But obviously, globalization is dead, and then so not only we have to find a solution to the supply, we also have to find a solution that's geopolitically, I guess, compliant. So now, not only we have to solve the supply issue, we also have to build a robust continental supply chain. Instead of sending all the materials and then refining that in China, and then building cells and then building materials and then shipping those to other continents. Now we have to refine materials in North America, potentially in Europe, or refine materials in North America, shipped it to Europe, and then build cells, build everything from cathode to electrolyte to anode and cells, and then packs in those continents. So that's another layer of complexity to solving this problem, but it's possible. It's definitely possible, and then we're already seeing, for example, upstream mining. A lot of the mines are already in South America, and then companies are building refineries in Canada, Mexico, to help supply to the North American market, and then also the U.S. already has pretty significant cell capacity, mostly Korean companies. But now we are seeing these Korean companies forming joint ventures with car companies, and then significantly scaling up that capacity. So we'll see more investments in these continents to both solve the supply problem itself, which is a pure commercial problem, and also the geopolitical problem.
I mean, when we were listening to the Minister of Egypt for Minerals and Mining, he was complaining that he wasn't getting enough investors in the mining business in Egypt. And so do you see that a country like China maybe developing funds specifically for the mining industry? Because obviously investments in critical minerals used to be in less complicated countries. Today it is in complicated countries, and the rules and regulations and government restrictions and what have you, let alone political stability and such. So where do you see the role of countries like China and its funds, and maybe the private sector, trying to close the gap of this lack of investment or underinvestment?
Well, so in the case of China in particular, they did a lot of investment in the past 10 years. And then, for example, just in the lithium industry itself, Chinese companies do a lot of operation in South America, Australia, also some in Canada. But then given the latest geopolitical situation, I'm not sure the countries and the governments are or can still do what they did before because of all the restrictions. And then now actually private investments become more palpable just because of the political sensitivity. And then we're seeing a lot of investment by private investors in assets in Canada, in Mexico, and then also developing the materials. So people talk about building this battery supply chain in North America, and people think just building gigafactories is the supply chain. But actually, gigafactories is just the tip of the iceberg. Say a 30 gigawatt hour cell plant. That's just the part of the iceberg above the water. The part that's underneath, you need electrolyte plants. You need cathode plants. You need anode plants. And then today, for example, in the U.S., most of the electrolytes that LG, Tesla use in the U.S. Are shipped from China. So we're seeing a lot of private investment to support building this complete capability in North America, a lot of that. And of course, also supported by government investment. Of course, with private investment, it's easier. It's just pure commercial. With government, sometimes there are strings attached, and you cannot do this. You have to do that, things like that. But definitely, we're seeing a surge in both.
Okay, thank you. Michael, I mean, when we talk of investment in mining, I mean, there is upstream, there is downstream. What about the midstream? Can you kind of go specifically into that and do a bit of a deep dive and see, is there a shortage in the midstream, or is the focus totally on upstream and downstream?
There's a massive shortage of midstream globally outside China. And look, be very clear in making that comment. I'm not being critical of China. China has a strategic plan that they've been working with for 10 years. Just we in Western governments and economies have been slow to see it. And, you know, we look at the kingdom. Vision 2030 is a strategic plan. Why do we choose to build the midstream in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Vision 2030 provides for it. In fact, our company's vision today as a battery materials and technology company comes right out of the automotive cluster we found reported in Vision 2030 in 2018, which required a cathode active materials plant, co-located with a battery cell manufacturing plant, co-located with an electric vehicle manufacturing plant. Today, Reed, Lucid, electric vehicle manufacturing plant. The Crown Prince just recently announced a new brand, SEER, electric vehicle manufacturing plant. Now, the battery cell manufacturing plants are to come. We're building the world's first integrated battery chemicals complex with a lithium chemicals plant producing lithium hydroxide monohydrate. Alongside that, co-located is a nickel chemicals plant with your nickel, cobalt, manganese sulfate. And then those two plants feed a cathode active materials plant which delivers into Vision 2030. More importantly, our model is based on upstream, midstream, and downstream integration of supply chains to produce high purity chemicals and cathode active materials to feed the customer, the electric vehicle manufacturer. The interesting analysis that comes out of our work looking at future worlds is just where a battery cell manufacturers going to sit in the electric vehicle supply chain. Because without an electric vehicle customer and without an upstream owned supply chain, they don't have a business. So we're seeing consolidation in that sector going forward. Looking at the kingdom, they leading the energy transition. The Vision 2030 has pinpointed the global shortage in midstream capacity, and we've been blessed with the opportunity to work with leading agencies in the kingdom to build out a global hub midstream capacity alongside which we can build domestic cathode active materials, more importantly, export the high purity chemicals and locate the cathode active materials plants in the countries in which they require locally or localized plants to satisfy rules of origin, to satisfy battery passport, to satisfy Inflation Reduction Act requirements. That's how we see the future, and that's where the kingdom is leading the energy transition in our view.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've been in the mining business in Saudi Arabia for 40 years. Okay, gypsum, not as sexy as cobalt or lithium or nickel, but still it was part of the rise of construction material in Saudi Arabia. But Aris, from a financial aspect and this underinvestment, what's keeping investors to shy away from this? Is it that investing in mining business is such a long-term process? Is it the return on investment is low? Is it government regulations? Where is the disconnect, and how can the government, especially PIF and the Ministry of Industry and Mining, be the true enablers, as His Excellency Bandar Al-Khuraif, our Minister of Industry, was saying?
I think that, first of all, the approach of Vision 2030, and as you see the PIF Green Plan and its various segments in the implementation, working from from a vision or a purpose into an actionable plan is an admirable way of doing things. Because, you know, it's like we say, a mason is not just a bricklayer. He's building a home, he's building a hospital. You need to remember why you're actually sweating in the sun and laying these bricks. And I think that's of critical importance. And we saw that in the in other jurisdictions in the past 20 years, the invisible arm, although it was supposed to almost spontaneously answer this demand, it fumbled, and it has not exactly done that very efficiently. Where we did see progress made, and I think that's also a good analogy to what you're doing here in the Kingdom, is, for example, in Quebec, in Canada, where the local investment arm, Invest Quebec, with help of the private sector, but also help of the energy utility, Hydro-Quebec, which I guess is the equivalency of your energy transition to solar and wind and renewable sources. Between those elements, they basically turned an industrial zone called the Bécancour near Montreal into a energy transition battery material hubs, and there's a snowball effect. We invested in 2 companies in Nouveau-Monde Graphite and in Nemaska Lithium, and changed their plans so that decided to locate the plants over there. And suddenly this opened up things. Vale is going to produce nickel sulfate there. BASF is putting their chemical plant there. General Motors has already announced that with their cell manufacturer, they'll put their site there. And there's this effect that Michael was talking about that's happening here, but this is to some extent an exception. So the government's role is extremely important in creating the vision, in educating people, and I think in also bridging this, let's call it trust issue or trust gap that exists between the extractive industries and the way they're sort of visioned and some sort of barons that could not be trusted, and all the safety issues and so on that are erroneously associated, I think, with our industries. All those kids with their cell phones and their TikTok, they don't even know what's in that, you know, that pretty much all of Mendeleev's table sits inside there, and behind that there are people like my friend here, who's producing the materials that go into these machines when you hail an Uber, and so on and so forth. I think there's a huge gap over there, which part of it is the industry's fault. We have not invested, I think, enough in education and public relations, in opening up, in demonstrating how we have really transformed and changed and how much we're giving back. It should be cool again to go to be a mining engineer and not just an app developer, right? So it's a lot of those things, I think, that will move in that direction. But at the end of the day, it looks like the only way to bridge the gaps on conversion. The downstream is okay, the market's taking care of that. But on conversion, on the midstream, and very much on the upstream, on enabling the emergence of all these mines that need to feed the system, because there's not enough material there just to rely on recycling or on rehabilitation of tailings and ponds, which is extremely important. But it's going to take a while before, like in stainless steel or copper, you build enough, or aluminum, there's enough in the system that could be recycled, so the proportion between primary and secondary changes. We're going to be probably 95% primary until 2050. We need to push these projects and materials in. The governments can help a lot with permitting, with providing data, surveys, satellites. You know, if they can find each other's missiles, why can't they find some lithium or nickel? They just need to decide to allow the civilians to enjoy these capacities. When these things, I think, sort of push forward, the clogging will open up, and we will be really all around the world, and not just regionally, be able to realize this vision of a carbon neutral globe in 2050, and hopefully much more than that going further.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes left, and I'd like to just address the public policy of how it helps. So, Kishal, if I can start with you, where do you see how can the government be an enabler through public policy and how it can help? Very quickly, in under a minute, please.
So I think very effective. For example, China back in 2016, 2017, they set up this incentive that cars, in order to get subsidies, have to use batteries made by a whitelist of battery companies, and that kicked out all the Korean companies. Now the U.S. has IRA, and then it's setting similar protectionist policies, and then that will very quickly kick out a lot of foreign producers and then move a lot of the supply chain to North America. I think a lot of these protectionist policies are very effective.
Thank you. Michael?
It's a great question. I think that subsidies work to a point until governments withdraw them. I think you need to look much more globally than that. I think that, again, it's government sitting down with industry and global private capital and working through how governments can incentivize global private capital to direct the capital to the most efficient way to deliver stable, secure, transparent, and integrated supply chains. And that means understanding upstream, linking it with midstream, and linking it with downstream, which in our case is cathode active materials. We look at the auditorium today. This was full when I was here Monday. We are now talking about the most important part of the energy transition. And yes, it's a Future Minerals Forum, but that's our future. So in that context, I take your point. I think what we've found, and we've got to be humble about this, it's about informing and educating, not just our industries. A mining industry can't live in isolation to where the communities need what they produce and how they provide. I mean, Peter Bryant on Monday talked about mining companies starting to rethink, to think differently about the way they present themselves in the business. And again, this is an area in which I think the Kingdom is leading. This is a wonderful forum, but we need to focus on this end of it as well.
Thank you. Aris.
I guess my important, to myself at least, my observation is, and as someone who came of age in the late 80s and thought, I'm joining a new world. All borders are gone. Everything is globalized, not just economically, but we're finally becoming Earthlings. And I'm not very happy with recent years' fragmentation and deglobalization and so on. Just because it's from a personal and a generational perspective, it's to some extent a disappointment. And I think that now all of us that are involved with energy transition and with e-mobility, mobility of a service, everything is this whole new and diversity. We have an opportunity here, which we shouldn't miss, to think again like Earthlings, as one planet. And I think we don't even have the option. It's so interconnected that even if we have partial fragmentation of supply chains for a while, what you do in the Kingdom has this ripple effect on someone in Tasmania and vice versa. It's one pretty small planet, quite crowded, and the only way to really get to a 2050 vision or a 2060 vision or anything else is to really unite as Earthlings and work together. I don't see any other alternative.
Thank you very much. We ran out of time. I want to really thank you, Erez, Michael, Guishao, and really through this forum, I'm hoping that we will achieve global collaboration for the sake of our Earth.
Yes.
Thank you very much. If you please give my panelists a round of applause. Thank you.